So is he working on his own, or is he simply an asset which is being controlled?
It had all the hallmarks of a Mossad access operation. You're not going to recruit Prince Andrew or Bill Clinton, so what's the next best thing? You recruit somebody that has access to them.
Well, could the Mossad have been behind it? Well, okay. The more leverage you got over important people in the countries in which you are, whether you like it or not, you're dependent upon. And remember, dependency always creates resentment. You can't trust them. They're not doing this because they love you. They're doing it because you're useful to them.
I would have to imagine that the CIA would not be okay with them collecting information on people like Bill Clinton and different American citizens without them at least getting a cut of it.
There was someone who was a CIA employee who once put it to me that all these people are temporary. The agency is eternal. The agency will live forever, so long as there are people like me, professionals, to do its job.
In your opinion, was Epstein an intelligence construct?
I don't know if he was a construct. Let's put it this way. From my perspective, if someone wasn't making use of the information that he had available, then somebody wasn't doing their job. That's very interesting stuff which is going on there. I don't know. Let's start at the beginning. Did he hang himself in his jail cell? Well, what do you think? Could have. Could have been so despondent that he did that. But overall, death was very, very convenient. But you don't know. That's a question that's the question that's never supposed to be answered and is unanswerable in this case. Why weren't the cameras going? Why weren't people where they were supposed to be? It's, again, would this reasonably make you suspicious? Then this was more than a simple suicide. Yes. You have to be, excuse the term, an idiot not to at least consider the possibility in that regard. But you can't prove it, but you're not supposed to. So if you look at Epstein, okay, this is what I see in Epstein for what it's worth. You got basically a smart kid, okay? Doesn't come from any particular background, but what he's good at is that he's good at numbers. And he makes friends with important people. And his career really seems to get going when he figures out new ways to dodge taxes. That's how he meets rich people, because he can come up with different means, different strategies to avoid a tax burden. Tax dodging, legally, sort of. And wealthy people are grateful for that type of thing. That's what earns him important friends. And then along the way, well, you know, if you're helping rich people avoid taxes, then you know certain things. Information that might be valuable to someone else. People take you into their confidence. You then monetize the confidence that you get. That's what I think he did, is that he monetized the confidence that people, first of all, they trusted him with their money, which may or may not have been a good idea. And then they began to trust him with other confidence. And then he begins to supply them with things. Okay? You want to go to my private island and have sex with young girls? Which just, well, apparently some people do. And he's recording this. Now, his female accomplice, how do you pronounce her first name?
Ghislaine.
Ghislaine.
It's either Ghislaine or
Ghislaine. Okay, it's one of the, let's call her Ghislaine.
Ghislaine,
okay,
for the sake of this conversation.
Sake of this conversation.
I don't think anybody will.
Well, if we're wrong, I apologize, Ghislaine.
She won't see it for another 19 years.
Yeah,
So.
well, might cut a deal. But they're recording this, you know. They're getting compromised. Why are you doing it? I think her argument was we're doing it to protect ourselves. From what? So either they were collecting the information to run blackmail on their own, or but you have a saleable asset there. And this is certainly one of the things that Jeffrey Epstein would have. He's into monetizing things. His skill with money is a saleable asset. The, alleged video of Prince Andrew doing things to underage girls. So, that gives you leverage. And who would be interested in that kind of information? Other people who wanted to manipulate these people. So my suspicion would be that either he was an entrepreneur who was monetizing the trust that other people placed in him by gratifying their desires, and then offering that for sale to whoever was interested in it. Or the other possibility is that he was, in effect, the kind of servant of some higher source that was using him. So is he working on his own, or is he simply an asset which is being controlled? Either one of those seem to be perfectly plausible. Was he just doing it for his own entertainment? That seems less like. I mean, so many things here. Just rather than trying to figure out what's true and what's false, just consider that there are a range of possibilities. That's what exists. And then try to calculate which of those range of possibilities seems more likely. I think it's the best that you can come up with. And what seems likely, even arguably obvious to me, is that this information, this whole database on the sins of the high and mighty, was being collected for some mercenary purpose, or was going to be applied in some form. Now, whether that was one or more intelligence agencies, or who else might be interested in that kind of information, because you're talking about getting compromising information on very important, very powerful people. Who are more important and powerful than they are? Who would be willing to blackmail them and compromise them and potentially destroy them? Who is it who doesn't think that they can be touched by the same sort of thing? So, if it isn't the heads of states, if it's not the kings and the prime ministers, if it's not the heads of the intelligence services, then who is it? I don't know. Really. See, that's the most dissatisfying answer in the world, isn't it? I don't know. But I don't. And it's one of those that you have to be willing to say. And I think it's one of the things everybody expects you to come up with an answer for something and to explain it. And no, I can't explain it. I would merely express that there is a suspicion that something of that order could exist, and you should keep your eyes open for it. You should not discount it as a possibility. But don't try to force it to some kind of conclusion. I think that's where you often run afoul of things where you get some idea, you get some sort of pet story in your head. You've now created some sort of narrative. It's going to be the Illuminati, or it's the Bilderbergers, or something of this kind. And you're going to seize on that. And then suddenly the story will then start controlling it. It is a possibility that the people that we think are in control are not in control. Frankly, when I look at most heads of states and other political leadership, I'm surprised those people are where they are. I'm not impressed by them on the whole. I don't know why those people are in control. So everything is a range of possibility. The size of the story, does the story just seem to be, develop a good BS detector. It's usually not that hard. If the story sounds unbelievable and stupid, then it probably is. Could be true, though, so don't completely ash can it right away. But don't put that at the front burner. That's just one of the, until you get more information, don't worry about that too much. Pay going on. So in the case of Epstein, this much we can say, something was going on. No one would go to the kind of, he was certainly intelligent enough to monetize the information he had, which must have been why he was gathering it to begin with. Who was the consumer of that information? Well, any number of people. Any intelligence agency in the world would be interested in that type of thing. It doesn't have to be just one. And if he's an entrepreneur, he's selling to everybody.
Okay, let's take a step back even further. Likelihood-wise, construct or compromised? Which is the greater likelihood?
Was he groomed to begin with to be this? Was he seen as a potential, here's a person who's smart and amoral, Okay, he has all the right sociopathic tendencies that we can create. He starts early on. He's working at a private school in New York. Not the Dalton School.
It is. Yep.
Oh yeah. Okay, there you go. You're not named after that. So, so, so. Well, there's a question for you. Was that something that was facilitated for him? Was he placed in that position to meet the right people? Or was it something that just evolved from his context? Both of those seems to me, both perfectly feasible possibilities. Either one of those could be true. And I think that you can map out the basic facts of his career. Taught at the Dalton School. Got into some trouble. A little too friendly with some of the students. Now, the kids tended to like him, which made some adults suspicious. On the other hand, some of the parents of those kids seemed to think that he was a great guy. So, once he loses his job there, I think that's when he's invited to join an investment firm by someone who was a parent of students who were at the school. So he made friends. There were people who trusted him. What did they see in him? He then proved to be useful in the manipulation of money and coming up with tax saving strategies, and that earned him more friends. That narrative to me can explain what happened. It doesn't seem to necessitate that there's an outside hand guiding all of this, but it doesn't eliminate that possibility. As I think we were talking about last night, people who seem to have a get out of jail free card. Is it just because they're lucky? No, just because the DA decided not to bring charges in this case. But when that happens over and over again, you have to raise the question, is somebody running interference for this person? Person keeps getting arrested again and again, and nothing really seems to happen. Well, it's either prosecutors and police not doing their job and not doing it correctly again and again, which is a possibility, or does someone basically, is a phone call made, something made and saying, let this person go. These charges will be dropped. That will disappear. You don't know. You don't see that. That's something that happens outside of view. It could happen, but you can't see it. The more it happens, the more the suspicion has to be created that there is something else which is going on. So I'd have to say that whether Epstein was created, whether he is a creation, or whether he is simply an opportunity that was created for others to exploit, those strike me as fairly even possibilities. But if someone wasn't exploiting what he had available to them, somewhere there were any number of people who weren't doing their job, if you weren't paying any attention to that.
Yeah. Okay, so going back, well, first of all, going back to a couple things, the Dalton School. Epstein was a college dropout, correct?
I can't remember I don't think he got a degree in anything.
Okay, so he has no degree. Dalton School it's in New York City, I believe, and
he had no teaching degree. That was the thing.
Right. Okay, so where I'm going with this is
it's a private school.
The Dalton School is one of the most prestigious preparatory schools in the United States. So how the hell does a guy that has no teaching experience and doesn't have a degree get a job as a teacher there? Number one. And number two, the other thing, again, when I'm thinking about compromised versus construct, the other thing that kind of weighs the balance, or seems to at least, to the side of construct is his money, right? Like, number one, where did his money come from? Number two, he's supposed to be like a hedge fund manager of some sort. Where there's no trading history, where are his taxes? There's no SEC filings. Like, where is all that stuff?
He's connected with a couple of entities, financial entities that go under, but he tends to bail out of these things before that happens, which I find vaguely suspicious. He tends to get out before everything collapses. Well, if you're gonna groom somebody for this, why him in particular? Well, he had no moral compass. That could be a portion of it. Private schools, one of the things about them is because they're private, they can hire anybody they want to do anything that they want. So they're not like public school, the same way that they can accept whatever students they want. This is something my wife, the school teacher, rails on constantly, is that private schools get to pick who they want. They get to cherry pick everything that they have, and they're not bound to all kinds of regulations. Whereas public schools, not to make a whole pitch for public schools, have to take everybody. So, and then deal with what they get. So, he certainly gets richer and richer as time goes on. We're talking about Epstein here. And I think that's going to come with, he manages to impress people. Part of it is that he seems to have been quite likable. Huh? Had to be. He's ingratiating. He's a courtier. The people who can really, to a certain degree, sort of manipulate and con the more important people around them, the richer and the more powerful, like all the servants of the royal family, all right? The people who actually call the shots, okay? So, likable, fairly unobtrusive. A guy who was useful. Yeah, people liked him. There's no substitute for that in terms of just being fundamentally likable. Those people get away with everything. They'll be given opportunities that other people don't have. They'll be forgiven things that other people aren't. And it seems to have been a situation where, if nothing else, he learned how to manipulate that to his advantage. But it doesn't mean that there isn't more to it.
As far as which intelligence agencies, we talked a bit, I had a CIA officer in here, John Kiriakou, and he basically just, to sum up, he said it had, in his opinion, all the hallmarks of a Mossad access operation, right? I mean, you're not going to recruit Prince Andrew or Bill Clinton, so what's the next best thing? You recruit somebody that has access to them, even if it's, just rubbing shoulders with them, hearing about what they're up to on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't necessarily have to be getting them in compromising situations. If you happen to wire a house for audio and video and record them having sex with minors, that's another thing. But if you were to speculate about which intelligence agency or agencies, I guess maybe we could start with that, because I would have a follow-up question depending on where it goes.
Well, could the Mossad have been behind it? Well, okay. The Mossad is a relatively small intelligence agency that works for a small country, a very small country, a disproportionately powerful country in some way, but small in terms of its general resources, really, and in terms of its physical size. So one of the things that, from my perspective, influences Israeli policy in every regard is always this gnawing, unavoidable sense of vulnerability. They're always on the edge of destruction. Okay, that it is a country which, I'm not trying to make a case for or against in this case. I'm just saying that Israel is a country that it would be relatively easy to wipe off the face of the map because there's not much to it. It's a fragile construction. So there would probably be, from the standpoint, if an intelligence service was utilizing Jeffrey Epstein as an asset and utilizing his information, I cannot think of any other service or state that would potentially find that more useful, that would have greater need, which isn't to say that it's the only one in that regard, but it could prove to be the more leverage you got over important people in the countries in which you are, whether you like it or not, you're dependent upon. And remember, dependency always creates resentment. You can't trust them because you know that they're only They're not doing this because they love you. They're doing it because you're useful to them. So at what point does Israel become something which is useful to become something which can be sacrificed? That could happen at some point.
I think a big reason why a lot of people go with Mossad or assume Mossad is because of, Robert Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's father, was a Mossad agent.
Mm-hmm.
But you also mentioned before about him, the possibility of him just being an entrepreneur and maybe double or triple or quadruple dipping and selling to the highest bidder. Do you think that if multiple agencies were to be involved, do you think it's more likely that that is the reason, or because he's just been compromised in general by or constructed by multiple agencies, either on their own or as a joint operation?
Well, then you get into the really murky realms. To what degree do ostensibly opposing intelligence agencies actually cooperate with each other? To some degree. Every now and then they have things they have to do together. It's not impossible that even you and your adversary have another enemy or threat, a mutual threat that you would have to deal with. I don't know, aliens. But see, that's the one that would come up. But it doesn't have to be that. I think there's more of that kind of mutual exchange between even opposing intelligence organizations that goes on. That is, it's not the type of thing that's ever publicly discussed, but there's always some degree of interchange among them. They talk to each other on a particular level, even when they're friendly. But they never talk wholly. I mean, from the American standpoint, you couldn't necessarily trust the Brits entirely, right? They could be, well, they were compromised, and they could still be. And you have slightly differing agendas. They're not always the same. All you have to do is look at the Suez crisis fracas in the 1950s. I mean, the U.S. was not interested in supporting the British return to control over the Suez Canal, even though the British wanted that. We weren't going to support them in it. So there are cases where even allies differ, and there are cases where enemies have certain points in common. And after all, they kind of know each other. They operate in the same world. They're all, on one level, professionals. You have a pretty good idea how the other side thinks. You have a pretty good idea as to what they want, how far they're willing to go. I think it's been said that one of the things that probably prevented a nuclear war during the Cold War period is that there was a good sense on both sides that nobody wanted to die. I mean, what do we want to do? We want to survive. The USSR wants to survive. The US wants to survive. Britain wants to survive. Israel wants to survive. Remember, it all comes down fundamental to survival. So what do you have to do to ensure that basic goal? Because if you don't survive, if you die, then nothing matters at that point. There's nothing more fundamentally important than that. You have to survive to achieve everything else. So that becomes the baseline. Everything has to be calculated upon that. And that entails some degree of dialogue and even understanding between opposing sides. Our ultimate general goal here is not to die. So we don't want to have a situation that arises which would create a thermonuclear war in which we all die. So we have to cooperate with each other to the degree to preserve our mutual existence. We can fight each other, everything else, but not to the point that it jeopardizes our individual survival. The Israelis are the most threatened. They're the most vulnerable. So in terms of who would be a consumer or a manipulator of Epstein's intelligence product, I'd agree that they're probably the most likely. But I wouldn't just focus my attention on them, and that it's nothing more than that.
I would have to imagine, or at least hope, that if, let's say, that the Mossad was involved, I would have to imagine that the CIA or whoever from the intelligence community was handling that would not be okay with them collecting information on people like Bill Clinton and different American citizens without them at least getting a cut of it.
Well, then you get into individual agencies, which are entities. They're like a living organism. These things just continue. They're not really dependent upon. Well, let's put it this way. Who's the director of Central Intelligence? Really doesn't, well, they wouldn't like that. But it doesn't matter that much. And it's going to change. But the whole organization is still there. It doesn't change the organization. You're getting thousands of people going around their jobs. Professionals, okay? People who have careers. And there was someone who was a CIA employee who once put it to me that, change in presidents doesn't really concern me. They come and go. I'm in this for a career. I'm going to be here my whole professional life. This is what I do. And I've seen this and that administration come and go, and this particular Senate committee come and go. All these people are temporary. The agency is eternal. The agency will live forever, so long as there are people like me, professionals, to do its job. So, who's at the top of the heap? Who's the next political appointee to be placed in charge of an organization that they've never been part of before? Doesn't really matter. All you have to do is wait them out. And that was that the political leadership, in a sense, didn't really matter. That wasn't the real. That wasn't even their view what the real government was. I think they were alluding to something that comes in this term of the sort of deep state idea, which is not to be scoffed at. It's a term which is overly used, but you do have all of these vast bureaucratic entities that continue, and they have the same kind of incentive that everything else does, which is to survive, to maintain their position, and to survive and grow. And any kind of information, any sort of fuel that will allow them to do that is necessary. Also think about it, that if you're a government agency which is susceptible to all of the slings and arrows of temporary political leadership, the more leverage and compromising material you have on those people, the better, isn't it? Doesn't it just make sense? You start getting some overly ambitious senator who wants to open an investigation. Well, perhaps we have some film that might come in. See, that's where coercion could be handling. Just to make people shut up.
What's up, guys? Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the interview. If you got anything out of this video at all, please like the video, leave me a comment, tell me what you thought of the video, tell me who you'd like to see on the show. I really appreciate the support. It goes a long way on these platforms, as you guys know. Most importantly, I have some excellent interviews coming up in the future that I'm really, really excited about. So please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of them. But that's it. Thank you for your support. I really appreciate it, and hope to see you again soon.